signing up for the Westgate Super Contest. If that's something that you want to do, or the Golden Nugget Ultimate Football Challenge, the Circa Million, or the William Hill Pick'em, Vegas Maddie over at footballcontest.com should be your proxy for all of those contests. If you do not live in the state of Nevada, you will need a proxy. You still have to sign up in person, but then you can have a proxy put your picks in for you. Maddie and Tony over there at footballcontest.com have done a phenomenal job for us over the last several years. We'll be going with them again here this season. So if you want to get involved in the Super Contest, Circa Million, Golden Nugget, or the William Hill Pick'em, Vegas Maddie and Tony over at footballcontest.com. We got one more guest here for this Tuesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from wagertalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
You know, it's Tuesday. I hear Brian's voice. It must be football season. Doing great.
Yes, sir. I've missed it. I've missed doing the daily show. I know we've done a lot of Bang the Book Radio content over the summer, but good to get back into this rhythm. Good to get back into this routine. And it's been a few weeks since we've talked to you, Rolf. How's everything been going for you?
Oh, everything's going well. You know, certainly excited with the football season, well ahead of where I've ever been. So hopefully that translates into more winners. But just enjoying the last few days of summer and certainly, again, getting ready for kickoff.
All right, so let's take a look at the NFL here first. Usually we talk a lot of college football with you, and then, of course, we'll do tons of college basketball once that season rolls around. But let's chat NFL a little bit here because, again, as we talked about in the previous segment, and as you will hear a million times from me here this week on the show, this is the dress rehearsal week. The starters playing usually into the second half, depending on the coach's mindset. So a lot more to pay attention to here, I think, this week. Anything that Rolf Michaels is looking for specifically to take advantage of?
Well, you have to look at some coaches that did about faces this year, you know, and two of those are Philadelphia and Seattle, as well as Jacksonville. You know, Doug Peterson was a decent preseason head coach. He had gone 6-2 going into last year, where he went 1-3. And this year he talked about how he knows what his team has. He's going to play a lot of young players. And, you know, despite them being a big dog against Baltimore and despite them winning against Jacksonville, that was a Jacksonville team that didn't even try. You know, game one, Philly only had 10 first downs, 227 yards. So, again, Peterson is a coach that you take a look at the fade the last 2 weeks. Another is Seattle and Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, one of the premier head coaches the previous 3 seasons before going 0-4 and 1-3 last year. He talked about changing his philosophy in the preseason. He's gone 1-1 this year, but his win against Denver was a game he didn't even try to win. They only had 221 yards and 13 first downs last week against Minnesota. They're on the road to face the Chargers team this week. And again, 2 obvious things. Let's just continue to mention, you know, Minnesota now with the premier head coach in Harbaugh has won 15 straight preseason games, and Dan Quinn, the ultimate Marv Levy Award, has failed to cover 13 straight preseason games. So you want to talk the top and the bottom of the rungs. There you have it with those 2 coaches.
You said Harbaugh from Minnesota. I believe you mean Zimmer, or did you mean Baltimore and Harbaugh?
I meant Baltimore has won 15 straight with Harbaugh. Appreciate it. Yeah, they've gone 13-2 ATS, and Baltimore has won 15 straight preseason games.
Well, and from what I remember, you know, Mike Zimmer was very good his first couple years in Minnesota in the preseason, and that's the thing. You know, these coaches kind of come in, they want to set a culture, they want to set an identity, and then once they get to that point, then they're not so much worried about the preseason. And, you know, in a lot of instances, you can't blame them. I mean, you look at Philadelphia here, they've already lost 2 quarterbacks in the preseason anyway, and Carson Wentz is an injury risk. So it makes sense for Philadelphia to do what they've been doing here so far in the preseason. Do you think anything changes for week 3? Do you think any of these teams do flip the switch? I mean, we talked about Detroit in the previous segment with Brian and his beloved Buffalo Bills. Matt Stafford hasn't played. Really nobody has played on the offensive side for Detroit. Kerryon Johnson had a few carries last week. But you know, do you think some of these coaches will get their guys out there and get them some reps this week? Or will those guys continue to err on the side of caution?
I think a lot of them are going the McVay route and what he did with the Rams, not playing anyone last year, not playing anyone this year. You mentioned Philadelphia and will they turn the switch? Well, I don't think so. Philadelphia is a team that has two decent backup quarterbacks, Nate Sudfeld, Cody Kessler, and they just signed Josh McCown yesterday. So you're going into week 3 and you're signing a brand new quarterback that is going to get a chance to play. So I don't think he worries about it at all. He's looking for the backup quarterback he wants. Other situations like, you look at the New York Giants. The New York Giants are number 1 this year, scoring 31.5 points per game. Can Daniel Jones beat Eli Manning? No, but do you have a quarterback situation where the O-line is going to be in for both players? Absolutely. The New York Giants put up 414 yards week 1. They put up 411 yards week 2. They're a team that, regardless of what Pat Shurmur did last year, he went 2-2, by the way, he's a team you've got to look at. And again, you look at a team like Jacksonville. Jacksonville has scored 11 points or 12 points this entire preseason. They're a team that doesn't. He's just proven he doesn't care. So, yes, week 3 is where you want to look to see who the coaches are playing. Week 3 is what you want to make the adjustments, but you don't want to make the assumption that each team is in that same situation or in that same want-to-win mode where some teams will be and some teams won't be this year. I think we'll find more value this week 3 than we have in the past because some coaches having a change in philosophy.
It's interesting you bring up Jacksonville and Miami. I actually wrote a preview for this game over at BangTheBook.com because it's actually on Fox on Thursday night. And you would think Nick Foles, with a new team, hasn't played in the preseason. You would think that this is a spot where he probably wants to get him some work. But then as you read some of the quotes from Doug Marrone after the week 2 game, he basically said about Gardner Minshew, who looks like the backup quarterback, there's not a lot of snaps left. He'll get some coming up. So will Nick Foles even play this week? If he does, how long will he be out there? This is the nice thing about the preseason. Even here in week 3, the coaches are still going to tell you what's going on, and it's up to you to take advantage of that information.
It is. And, let me mention now, I will be posting the Week 3 Wager Talk preseason guide, and in it are the game-by-game stats and the quarterback stats for both weeks. And, while the quarterback stats may not be as important this week, I think Week 4 is where they're vital. But you talk about Gardner Minshew, by looking at my guide, I could see that Gardner Minshew was 7 of 14 for 46 yards in Week 1. Week 2, he was 19 of 29 for 202 yards. Very few preseason players throw for 200 yards and have 30 attempts. That's going to be something that you have to keep an eye on moving forward, that he has all that opportunity. Meanwhile, you look at Miami, you have Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen. Well, they got 9 and 18 pass completions last week. If those two are going to get the majority of play, you have 2 potential starters on Miami. When you have both of your main quarterbacks playing, you can be rest assured that the O-line is going to start. You may have a 3/4 to 1/4 starter's edge in that Miami game. Again, I don't know that. They haven't said that yet. We're going to learn a lot about the teams after today's practice and after tomorrow's walkthrough, but that's something I certainly would keep an eye on.
That's an excellent point. If it's going to be a starter or the primary backup, you want guys that are going to protect that guy. So that's an excellent point there from you, Rolf. One other thing I want to ask you about here for week 3, just because I think this is kind of a quirky situation. Green Bay and Oakland play on Thursday night in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is very unique for the preseason, to say the least. I know the Raiders have played over in London, and there have been games in Mexico City and all that. But Winnipeg, Manitoba, and we do see a line movement here on Green Bay up from 1.5 to 3. What do you make of this? I mean, is this just a guessing game to figure out who actually wants to be there? Do you think that there can be an edge?
Well, you're looking at Matt LaFleur, first-year head coach, so you don't exactly know what to expect. What you do know is this Green Bay offense, with Aaron Rodgers sitting, he talked about playing Aaron Rodgers a quarter last week against Baltimore. Aaron Rodgers ended up being sore in the warm-ups, and what did they do? They put up 226 yards against Baltimore and only 11 first downs. with Deshaun Kaiser starting. So you have Deshaun Kaiser starting a game. If that's the case again this week, I think the line move is completely wrong. Listen, John Gruden wants to win preseason games. Off the top of my head, I think he's 35 and 17 straight up. He's won both of this year's preseason games. They put up 407 yards week one against the Rams. Again, the Rams don't try, but still putting up 400 yards week one means something. Put up 373 yards against Arizona. That was basically in the first half before they sat back, did nothing, and let Arizona play catch-up to make it a close-looking score. Gruden wants to win, and when you only have 3 quarterbacks on your roster, instead of some of these teams that are going to play 5 already with injuries, I have Derek Carr going to start, and then I have either Mike Lennon or Nathan Peterman, and Nathan Peterman, yes, was an interception machine, but Gruden now loves him. He's changed some techniques. Nathan Peterman went 8 of 8 last week. He went 9 of 12 in the preseason. So your number 3 quarterback is a starting, veteran, experienced quarterback that has gone 17 of 20 in 2 preseason games, and he's going to be playing mop-ups against Manny Wilkins, Tim Boyle, and Deshaun Kaiser. Again, unless Gruden said something that I didn't read that says, well, we're going to sign a quarterback and play that 4th-string quarterback all game, I think Oakland's the side.
All right, so we transition over to the college football side of things here, and we did talk over the summer, so we don't have to catch up as much as we did on yesterday's show with Kyle Hunter. And if any of our listeners missed that, please make sure you go back and check that out. Great segment, about an hour long with Kyle, talking about a lot of different college football ins and outs. But, Rolf, in terms of since we last talked, any changes to the power ratings, any other notes, nuggets, anything you want to pass along here as games get underway on Saturday?
You know, one thing I learned a long time ago is I don't overreact to one player getting injured, because we go through January, February, March, April. We assess a team. We assess a unit. We make a power rating number. We post it in the summer. Then more often than not, one guy gets hurt, and all of a sudden you think, oh, my God, that's down a couple points. Well, you have to go back and look at the entire perspective of the unit, who the backup is, and not just overreact to them losing a player being suspended, transferring out, or getting lost for the year. There's still time for that backup to learn a position. He's got a couple weeks of practice left. So what I do is, you know, I only posted my power rating numbers a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, so they're still very current with a lot of the spring moves. I just take notes of everything that happened. And next week, before that first week, I'll go through all my notes. I'll compare them as how a unit did, how it affects the DBs, first the safeties, then the DBs, then the defense as a whole, then as a team as a whole, and then see if I need to adjust my rating for that. So, again, there's many, many years ago where I was quick to react, over-adjusted, came up with skewed power ratings weeks 1 and 2. So I've become much more conservative, learning that one player does not a unit make.
Well, and that's an important point, and I guarantee I'll talk about this with Brad Powers coming up here on Thursday, in that, you know, for you guys, and I got to my power ratings a little bit late. I did a version in July, and then I did an update now over the weekend that I posted on Monday. You know, I was doing baseball all summer and doing a very poor job of that, but, you know, it was harder for me to get to college football. Brad started his power ratings in probably March. I know you started yours pretty early in the off season as well. You kind of want to sit on those for a little bit. You know, you already did all that work. You don't want to overanalyze. You don't want to make tweaks for the sake of making tweaks because you feel like you should be doing something.
Yeah, and again, with me not posting until August, you know, that's the latest I've ever posted, because I was a little more involved in baseball this year than I have been the past. I think that's the perfect point is, you know, unless you're losing, I mean, if you're losing a Trevor Lawrence, you're going to make your adjustment. But even if you're losing a seasoned veteran, you know, if he's a multi-year all-conference player, yes, I will make a tweak to my power rating adjustment. But if he's just a returning starter, a person who is projected to start, even if he has high praise and he's important, I still don't make that adjustment. I let it play out on paper and then see if I'm quick to make an adjustment after, because I have an asterisk next to that team, but I'm still going to let my power ratings that I get all summer with the entire team focused play out and come to fruition before I make the changes.
One other thing I want to ask you about, and I asked Kyle Hunter this yesterday. I'm going to ask all the professional handicappers and the ones that sell picks here this on the show this week, or if I don't get to it this week, next week. It's a fine line to walk because you're going to have some opinions on teams, and you're going to want to dig your heels in with some of those opinions. For me, I'm posting free content. You post a lot of great free content yourself, but I post free content. There's really no obligation for people to follow along with what I suggest or what I pick. It's information for them. If they want to use it, they can. If they don't have to. But you do have clients that look to you. So in terms of trying to take aggressive stances on teams in your power ratings relative to look-ahead lines or season win total numbers, something like that, how do you walk that fine line of digging in but not being irresponsibly away from where the market is?
Well, I compare my numbers. I compare everything I do to others, but rarely does that make me change my needle. Again, 15 years with Phil Steele, working on everything he did in the preseason, working on what you have with, what we did towards the magazine, working on those power ratings just taught me a lot. It taught me that if you have the same information as everyone else and you know how to analyze that team, stick with your power rating. Again, I emphasize that because if there's new information you didn't know, don't be stubborn and be afraid to change your rating. But if there's nothing new that comes up and my numbers are, I think I'm 5 or 6 points off on Texas. I'm lower on Texas. I'm higher on Washington State. And even Brad and I talk all the time. And, we just have different power ratings. We are all 4 or 5 points on some teams. We'll see what happens after a couple weeks. But, even bouncing things off someone respected like Brad when we talk back and forth, unless he tells me something that I didn't know that makes me change my thought, I'm going to stick by my guns. Obviously, if I am wrong week 1 and I give out a play to my customers and it loses, yes, I'm going to adjust my power rating. If it's one of those games that I was completely further off than the rest of the market, I may tweak it an extra point or two after one game. But I'm not gonna go back and return my number to what the norm is or what the consensus of the other lines is because of one game. It's going to take 2 or 3 games to prove that I was wrong. And yeah, I'll be a little stubborn if I think I'm right and everyone else is wrong. But again, it's one thing being stubborn. It's letting one team burn you for more than 2 times that you learn your lesson.
Well, and I think that's a big thing, and this is something that impacted me a lot during the baseball season, and I've never learned more from a baseball season than I have from this one because it just didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. That crisis of confidence is such a big deal here. I mean, obviously you have to do the research, run through the analytics, have your power ratings or whatever it is that your method is. You also have to have confidence in what you're doing, in what you've done in the past, in what you may be doing differently this year. That's an important thing. You don't want to throw away the work that you've done because somebody in the market is different from you or, maybe some team that you like in week 1 goes out there and plays bad. You know what? Every team's going to play their best game of the year. Every team's going to play their worst game of the year. Their worst game of the year may be game 1. It might be week 1. So that's an important thing that I think handicappers of all levels need to try and develop and understand is that you have to have confidence in what your own thoughts are until you're proven completely wrong.
Yeah, and it is. There's times when, in college football and in college basketball, my confidence might butt up and become cocky because I feel my numbers are as good as anyone's. So, if I'm wrong once, I'm still going to be confident. If I'm wrong twice and I'm watching this tape and this O-line and this offense that I thought was better, that's the thing. Losing a game does not mean you had a bad power rating. if someone returns 3 kickoffs and has a pick 6 against you, that doesn't mean my defensive line was bad. That doesn't mean my linebackers played poorly. So it's adjusting your power ratings for the right reason. Because, as Brian said, I caught the end of his show, he's an eye test guy. So losing a game once or losing on a team twice, I may not change a power rating if they are quote-unquote bad losses, or I had a yardage edge but still lost as a dog. And likewise, I may actually win on a team and get lucky, but still change the power rating because the eye test shows to me I was very fortunate to win that. Their O-line got manhandled against a very mediocre D-line. I had them way too high in my mindset. So a lot of people only change power ratings because of wins and losses, and that's not the case at all for me, where I may lower a team even if I win, or may not change a team even if I lose twice on them.
And those are all phenomenal points, especially the point about, even if you win a bet, even if, maybe you had a line minus 14, the line was minus 9, that team covered the number, still, maybe that is a game that you still want to adjust. Being that far off from the market, even though they won, maybe they didn't look that good in the process, or, maybe the line moved against you, something like that. So all key factors, and a lot of this will make a lot more sense once we have, something tangible to tie it to after some of these games have already been played. And we've got 2 games coming up here this weekend, Rolf. Miami and Florida in a neutral site in Orlando, Arizona on the road against Hawaii. I know we talked about Hawaii, a team that you like. We'll talk about that game here in a second. But Florida and Miami here. Florida 7.5-point favorite for this one. Once again, neutral site game. No home field advantage in play for this one. Total 47.5. I don't know about you, Rolf, but I've got this game dead on the number at 7.5.
Yeah, I did as well. And, Florida has some injuries in their secondary, but, you're going against a very young quarterback. And, I'm not sure why the total dropped when there's a quarterback change, because, there's not one Vegas bookmaker that's watching these Miami quarterbacks practice. So because Tate Martell got beat out and he's a Bishop Gorman guy, people drop a number because Dan Enos and Manny and Diaz pick a different quarterback. I'm not sure of that. What you do have to remember is this. You have a Miami team that was number 119 last year in plays per game. They averaged only 64.2 plays per game. You have a very young quarterback. You have a left tackle that's a true freshman. You have a right tackle that is a redshirt freshman. I believe you're going to have a very, very conservative play call on the Miami side. I lean with Miami just because I think it'll be a low-scoring game, but I clearly do like the under in this game.
Now, I'll take away the case-by-case basis answer because that's the easy way out here when it comes to looking at totals early on in the season, but do you have a way that you tend to gravitate? I mean, do you look at the defense thinking that offensive timing might be a little bit of a problem? Do you look at the offense because, defenses are going to make mistakes. They're going to make coverage mistakes. They're going to, miss tackles early on in the year, stuff like that. Do you sort of have a lean one way or another across the board in terms of the totals market early in the year?
Well, when you have a young quarterback, I think it matters who he's playing. And to have to go up against an SEC defense that, returned 8 starters, they lost one of them, so they actually have 7 back now. And watching Dan Enos, you got to remember, Dan Enos was at Alabama the last couple of years. So, he saw what Tua did, and that's why he went with his quarterback pick. He wants that extra dimension with that run pass option. Having coached Bama's quarterbacks the last 2 years, here he coaches quarterbacks as well as being the OC. So really it was his decision. Watching his press conference on after and why he picked him, he talked about how this kid is so young. He still drops in the pocket, and we changed it a little bit this year, and he has to know where his feet is, and he has to know what his throwing angles are. And when you have that type of young quarterback with that type of young O-line against a top 20 type defense, I think it's an automatic that your play calling has to be on the conservative side. And, you look at the Miami defense and, last year they allowed under 279 yards per game, that under that Manny Diaz team. And, with 6 starters back, they're not going to be as good as they were last year. And, while you had that turnover chain that Manny Diaz started, and there were plus 10 and plus 13 turnovers the previous 2 years, last year they weren't. They were even. They were actually -1 turnover on the year. I think that comes back and the defense starts making some big plays and they're excited. So, to me, I don't use many totals early because you have so many big favorites. And when a big favorite and an OC is perhaps bringing in a new quarterback or changing some plays or schemes, depending on who he has next week or who the next game is, there's oftentimes they don't show anything, like an NFL preseason game where we're not going to show our entire package or offense. So I'm leery to hedge out and play those type of totals. This situation, we have 2 Power 5 teams. We know what we have on the defensive side. The offensive side, I feel are going to be better, but they're not up to snuff at this point. And I think totals are based on what, mid-season numbers are for the teams that were on the field. And I think you could pull some advantages with these young quarterbacks.
All right, so the other FBS game here on Saturday, Arizona and Hawaii. And as is often the case, it feels like right after we finished up yesterday's show, I believe Right Angle, I'm going to assume it was them, but somebody released a totals play on this game, drove this total up from 70 or 71 all the way up to 74. This happens all the time on my show. There'll either be a big line move from a syndicate releasing or some sort of big injury news that happens within an hour after I finish up the show. In any event, the side's still 11 here for this one. Total now up to 74. Rolf, your thoughts on Arizona versus Hawaii?
Well, of these 2 games, I'm not going to have a play on either side on either total. So while I said I like the total in the earlier game, it's not going to be a play. I lean with Hawaii just to keep it close. And I actually lean with the under. I am, yes, I understand the quarterbacks were dynamic and both were beat up and, both are back and you have situations that are going to happen. But you look at Arizona and, they were a team that the only time they really pressed tempo is when they were down. You look at their plays per game from last year, and they had 100 plays against Houston because they were down so big and they tried to press the clock to come back. If this is a close game, I think the total stays under. If a team gets out, obviously, to a 21-point lead, that changes the dynamic. So this is a game that I'll look at live betting. I'm very high on Arizona. We talked before, and if people didn't listen, Hawaii is one of my upset picks in the Mountain West. So, again, I'm high on them with their 18 returning starters. But Arizona, what Sumlin did in his second year, he has so much depth. His D-line this year, he has guys that started last year that are now on the number 2 D-line. He has guys that JUCOs that he brought in, a couple of JUCOs that are starting. We have a team that is completely different than where he was. He's going to have second unit teams that might have been able to beat his first units last year. And, a note I rang, and these are just notes I put down in my book. If the program believes in your coach, especially in the second year, well, Arizona in the spring semester had the football team had the highest GPA any Arizona football team has ever had. To me, that means they're buying in. That means they believe in this coach. That means they're going to classes. That means they're getting excited to go to practice. That means you have a team that knows how to read a playbook and knows how to make adjustments. Little notes like that I put down tend to go a long way with me. So both of these teams are very much play-on teams for me. But I also think Arizona, Sumlin, the coaches are friends. So, it's a team where I don't see him blowing them out. They come back, Arizona has a bye next week, and then they have Northern Arizona. If you get a lead and you have the game comfortably in control, you don't play Texas Tech to September 14th. Why put anything on tape and let them see it for three weeks down the road? If you have to show it, obviously that's a different story. If I said if Hawaii jumps out to a big lead and Arizona has to come back, then I think the total goes over. If Arizona or the game is back and forth and Arizona has that 10 to 14 point lead, I think they control the pace. I think they run the ball more. They give the ball to Taylor. You have a 1,500-yard rusher that rushed for 5.6, or off the top of my head, 5.7 yards per carry, and a Hawaii team that wants to try to run the ball more as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think these are both playoff teams, and I mentioned that in the preview I did over on our Bang the Book YouTube page, and I also mentioned it in the preview that I wrote. I want to back both of these teams, and I'm right on the number here for this one. I'm at 11.5, so I'm pretty much right there for this game. But that's what I want. I want Arizona to win this game by 10 to 14 points because I want to be able to play on these two teams down the line. You know, last year, Hawaii, 2 big outright upset wins in their first 2 games, scored over 100 points in those 2 games. All of a sudden, their lines were completely out of whack. They were 3-9 against the spread in their last 12 games after those 2 big outright upset wins to start the year. So I'm hoping this one plays close to the total, plays close to the spread, so I can get some future value on these two teams.
Yeah, and Arizona, you know, you look at Arizona, and yes, they went 5-7, but Arizona was plus 26 yards per game in Pac-12 action. Well, you know, you're looking at plus 26 yards per game. Utah was only plus 46. They're a team that, you know, Khalil Tate was banged up. They couldn't do their offense. You lost early to BYU and you lost early to Houston. You know, your only wins, the only upset win you had was you knocked off Oregon when you played well down the stretch. So I agree with you. Both play on teams for me. I actually have the number 10. So, you know, my number leans with Arizona, but by no means would I bet Arizona in this situation.
What is your home field advantage number for Hawaii?
You know, I'm going to say it's 3.75, and I'm looking as we speak. I had it a couple years back in the Phil Steele days. I had it as high as 5.5, and I think I had Boise at a 7. So when Boise and Hawaii played each other, it was the biggest gap between the two. And as I'm talking here, I'm finding Hawaii, and Hawaii, I am down to 3.25 because I use a 3-year and a 5-year sliding scale with a formula I have.
Okay, that's what I was curious about, if that was the gap between the line for us, because I only have Hawaii with a 2.5-point home field edge based on, you know, the formula that I use, where I look at a 3-year sample size of straight up and against the spread at home, and that's actually up from what it was in 2018. So Hawaii maybe getting a little bit of that swagger back at home, but it's an important distinction to make here because everyone thinks going out to the island, oh, it's such a challenge, you're not going to be focused, this and that. But Hawaii has not performed well at home. So for our listeners that are out there, don't overvalue what Hawaii at home actually means here in 2019, because as Rolf just mentioned, and you know, as the system that I've figured out has kind of suggested, their home field advantage is not nearly what it used to be.
You know, you look and since Rolovich has been here, you are 3-9 as a home favorite, and even last year they went 2-4. And you know, you look at a Wyoming team, they laid 2, they won by 4. So even though they were 2-4, one of those wins was only by a couple points. You know, what people sometimes forget is when you look at a trip like Hawaii, or you look at a trip like Boise, and you may say, well, this team is ready and focused because the coach has them ready for the unique setting. Don't be afraid to look to play against the team that makes that Hawaii and Boise trip. Again, the first game of the season is so much different. You have all the times. You have no travel restrictions. You're not having to change your schedule to fly out to Hawaii. You're not having to fly out early to get acclimated to the humidity. This is Arizona. It's 118 degrees every day. Yes, they don't have humidity, but they certainly have a heat index that matches. You also don't have a game next week. You also play Northern Arizona in 2 weeks. So that is a much different situation than, you know, a team a team that's playing back-to-back road games having to face Hawaii in either the first or the second straight, home game is much different.
So we do have the 2 games here on Saturday, the 2 that we just discussed. We got 6 games coming up at the FBS level on Thursday. I believe it's 8 or 9 on Friday, and then a whole bunch on Saturday, 1 Sunday and 1 Monday as well. So a full busy weekend of college football here for week 1. But, Rolf, these numbers have been up since early June. So have you attacked any week 1 lines yet? Do you know what your time frame sort of looks like for you to enter the market? How are you playing week 1 with these numbers that have essentially been out there for 2.5 months?
Yeah, I played USC when it came out early. They were 10.5. They are now 13.5. I bet BYU, Florida State. I bet Florida State, part of it at -3.5, part of it at -4. Those are the only 2 games that I've bet. I'm happy to go over some of the biggest differences I have in my power ratings. And the next team I'm about to bet, I'll just share with you guys because it's not going to move the line, is South Carolina. I have South Carolina as 15 points better than North Carolina at Charlotte. That current line was 7. I think it's climbed up to 7.5. I am a believer in South Carolina, looking to fade North Carolina. And my second biggest power rating difference, I'm excluding Army Rice because I have Army as a 31-point favorite with a line of 23.5. Obviously, a 7.5-point difference with an Army option team with a line of 30 is not the same as me looking at another line that has a 6-point difference, and that's Toledo. I think Kentucky should only be a 6-point favorite. Off the top of my head, I think Kentucky is 0-11. ATS is a home favorite the last few years. You have a team that lost multiple NFL players from a unit that never has NFL players on their team. And I have Toledo rated pretty high in the conference. I think Toledo can pull that upset and grabbing those 12 points. So, the 2 I bet are USC and Florida State. The next couple will be South Carolina and Toledo. And then the 5th play that is looking like a play of mine, I have not played it yet, is Virginia Tech against Boston College. I have VT conservative at -5.5. They're laying 2.5 to Boston College. I am high on the Hokies. That's another team that I have higher than most. You have 10 starters back from a team that was decimated in the secondary last year. You have a team that's going to be playing for Bud Foster in his last year at DC as defensive coordinator there. And they're a team that I think will jump out of the gate pretty quickly.
Interesting is you mentioned Rice and Army, and I actually made some power ratings adjustments to lower my line closer to what's out there in the market. So that's a little bit concerning for me that maybe I went in the wrong direction there because I had that one 29. I brought it down to 25. Also the same thing with Kentucky and Toledo. I made a 3-point adjustment on that game because I was in the Kentucky -9 range pretty much off of the market. So maybe I didn't trust myself there in those 2 particular instances, trying to get a little bit closer to the market. Maybe I will have to reevaluate those 2 teams as we move forward here. But one other quick point I want to ask you about here, some food for thought, plant a little seed for next week when we talk about some of these games specifically, and then I'll let you go, is that this Boise State-Florida State game, one of the things that I talked about with regards to this game is that you cannot simulate weather. And you mentioned it with Hawaii. Yeah, it's humid, but it's hot. Arizona's used to that. Boise State going to Florida State, it's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. It's going to be miserable in Jacksonville. Was that a factor for you in taking the Seminoles here, or was this more of a power ratings look for you?
Oh, no, it very much is. In fact, that's not a power rating game at all because I have that game lined at 5, and I bet it at 3.5 and 4, and I think it's up to 4.5 now. It is very much me giving Boise credit, but you're going to have a very young quarterback for Boise making his first start against the Florida State front 7. That again, I have Florida State higher than most people. I think this Florida State team coming off a losing season playing in Florida against a Boise team that still gets a lot of love. You have to remember, people still remember Boise and the Fiesta Bowl and what they did, but making this kind of trip in Florida, in the heat and humidity with a very young quarterback against the Florida State defense, it's as much of a mismatch when I look at the matchups between the O-lines and the D-lines and the talent that I have Florida State compared to Boise. Boise I still think is going to win the Mountain West, although I pick Hawaii as a long shot, just because they have the cleanest schedule. But I just think we are going to get a completely focused Florida State team in this situation.
Real quick here, and this is going to be a little bit disappointing for you. Virginia Tech line is moving out there. -3 extra juice now on the Hokies. Also seeing some movement, Mississippi State, Louisiana Lafayette, and that South Carolina game. So things definitely on the move out there in the marketplace. Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now at the website, Rolf?
As I said, anyone going to play preseason, if you just go to the webpage, go to Ralph Michaels' page, and you can download that Wager Talk guide for free. If you need another set of power ratings, I know Adam does a great job. I know Brad does a great job. There's a lot of good sets of power ratings. If you're just learning how to handicap, take a look at your power ratings. Get a bunch of power ratings. Use the consensus, and then start updating them each week. It's a great way to learn how to start. No one starts by making their power ratings their first year of using them. Everyone starts off by getting some power ratings, taking out a consensus of who they trust or the way they like handicapping, make them their own, and making adjustments.
Rolf Michaels, once again, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com, at CalSportsLV on Twitter. Rolf, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.